Chumash. And the reason for that is, as the Torah itself explains, the first 4 books are, so to speak, dictated from heaven to Moshe. So Moshe is merely a scribe, a secretary, someone who you hire someone to record what you are saying. Had Moshe had the equipment that we have here, so then he would have been on Torah any time. But we're talking about over 3 millennia ago, so we have that's the written Torah. This 5th book introduces itself and tells us, Ele advorim asher diber Moshe. This 5th book is not dictation. It's inspiration. It's written through a HaKodesh, with the Holy Spirit. It's approved and edited, so to speak, by heaven itself. But it is not dictated by heaven. Moshe's words, and not only Moshe's words, the construction of the book is that of Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, Chazal said, and all the Meforshim follow in this path, that some of the rules that pertain to how we interpret what is written in the first 4 books of the Torah do not necessarily apply when we come to study the book of Devarim. So, for instance, the Gemara says that in the first 4 books of the Torah, Chazal, one of the 13 methodologies of explaining the Torah, is that of Gzeira Shova. Gzeira Shova means the use of a word in one chapter or on one subject matter, and the same word, even in a different context, is used in another chapter. So there's a tradition regarding the first 4 books that there is such a concept of Gzeira Shova. And if it is repeated again, so that there is room to find in Torah Shebaal Peh a reason for it, and even a halacha. In Mishnah Torah, in the 5th book, the book of Devarim, there is no room for Gzeira Shova, because there it is Moshe. And when Moshe repeats a word, he repeated a word. So you can't make a Gzeira Shova. You take a poem and the word is repeated twice. The second time in the context doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the first part where the poem quoted that word. So therefore, Chumash Devarim is different. There's no Gzeira Shova in Chumash Devarim. There's a concept that Rashi follows. It's a disagreement between Rashi, different interpretations between Rashi and the Ramban. Rashi holds that there's a rule of ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah. The Torah is not written in chronological order. In other words, things that happen later may appear earlier. So you cannot use the Torah, so to speak, as a history book, as a narrative, because there's no order to it. The order is written in heaven, and since we cannot read the mind, so to speak, of heaven, so we have to leave it alone. So ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah. But the Torah tells us things that happen later. For instance, by Avraham Avinu, we have a number of instances that he has. When is the bris ben absorim? When was Lech Lecha? When happened? When did the wars take place? Rashi says, "Ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah." Right? We don't know. It's not a question why the Torah brought it earlier, quoted it earlier or later. That's because there's no such rule. The Ramban holds a contrary opinion, with all due respect to Rashi. The Ramban always quotes Rashi first before he introduces his own commentary, which is not just a sign of respect, but of the great intellectual rabbis had. So he says about Rashi, Kilo Mishpat Tapchora. Rashi is the firstborn. Rashi is entitled to the respect due to the eldest in the family. But I'm going to disagree with him. But you can do that too. You can love your parents and appreciate them, and you can disagree with them, as everybody does. And it's never personal. That's the dividing line. It's never personal. You see throughout the Gemara itself is a series of hundreds of disagreements. And yet there's no animosity involved. In today's world, if I don't agree with your opinion, somehow I have abused you. It's not that I disagree with you, I hate you. Because you don't accept my opinion. So in today's world, everything is personal. When it becomes personal, then it's almost impossible to fix. Not only to fix, to coexist. The whole basis of the Gemara is coexistence. All sorts of different opinions, they all exist together. We'll have to follow one of the opinions as a practical matter, but we'll realize that there are other opinions, and we have to understand them and deal with them as well. So the Ramban holds, Rashi says, Ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah. There's nothing that in the first 4 books have no chronological order whatsoever. So you leave that part alone, right? You can't bring any proof because the Torah wrote this first and this second, that this happened before the other one. There's no such thing. The Ramban holds no. He says the Torah is a perfect narrative. What happened first is written first. What happened later is written later. And therefore, you have to look at the Torah in that view. Now, these are 2 enormously divergent views. But that's the first 4 books of the Torah. In the book of Dvorim that Moshe wrote, everybody holds that it's a chronological narrative. It's written by a human being. The nature of human beings, when they write things, they write it with an order. So even Rashi will hold in the Chumash Dvorim that the concept of Ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah does not apply. And if in Chumash Dvorim A is written before B, it's because A was said by Moshe before B. Which leads us to another understanding. And that is that Moshe has a construct here. It isn't. When I was in the yeshiva a long time ago, so the Rebbeim all wanted us to become public speakers, believe it or not. In fact, when you reach a certain level in the Beis Medrash, you have every Shabbos a different student spoke before the entire yeshiva and before the entire faculty. So let's say I remember I was 16 years old when I did it, right? So here you have a great Gaonim from Lita listening to a 16-year-old American kid tell them what the Parsha means. But I thought I was right anyway. But in any event, when you have to speak publicly, in order to be effective, there has to be a construct. There has to be an order. There has to be a beginning and a middle and an end. One of the worst things is that there are people who are very good speakers and their content is excellent, but they can't land. The plane keeps on circling. It never comes in for a landing. You don't know how to end. So there are tactics for that. Because oftentimes, no matter how great your middle is, if the end is not logical or meaningful, then the whole thing is a waste. So Moshe Rabbeinu, when he writes, and this is not right, Advorim Asher Diber Moshe. This is a public speech. This is Moshe Rabbeinu speaking to the Jewish people. Naturally, he writes it and records it, and it becomes the 5th book of the Chumash. But it's a book that was spoken to the people. There's a great question that the Meforshim deal with. How great was the literacy percentage, so to speak, of the Jewish people in the desert and in the first centuries of their existence in the land of Israel? Now, for the last 2,500 years, maybe more, the Jewish people were almost 100% literate people. Everybody could read or write. It was it always like that? Now, in the ancient world, not only in the ancient world, as late as the 20th century, the majority of people in the world were not literate. Couldn't read or write. In all the biographies of people such as Lincoln, who was the greatest president America ever had, he taught himself to read or write. He was 9 years old. Most of the people were never literate. Not only that, they certainly were not literate in a language foreign to them, which we know from our own experience, right? My generation, it was a Yiddish-speaking generation. My grandchildren don't understand a word. Rabbi Huttner used to famously say, he said, my students are illiterate in 3 languages. So Moshe spoke to them. So the message is an oral message. Could they read it? So Moshe insisted that they become a literate people. He said, "V'ata kisvu lachem es Shiur Aug." Write down everything. Limdo heitev, teach people how to read it and understand it. That's how we will preserve it. Because till our day, the preservation of knowledge is dependent upon books, so to speak, upon the written word. We don't have a recording of Plato or Aristotle or of Sir Isaac Newton. So how do we know what they said? How do we know what they believed? So we only know it from what they wrote. So Moshe Rabbeinu forces the Jewish people to become a literate people. It's one of the mitzvahs of the Torah, to write a Sefer Torah. So we think that the mitzvah is, and it is, I don't want to demean it, chas v'sholom, but you hire a sofer and you pay him X tens of thousands of dollars, and he writes the Sefer Torah on your behalf, and then you have an affair and you bring it into the shul or to the institution, and you have a dinner and people say nice things and you go home. So that may be an exact fulfillment of the mitzvah, because I wrote a Sefer Torah. My agent, who is like me, wrote the Sefer Torah. But Moshe is speaking in a broader sense. That everything has to be written down. It's on that basis that Rabbeinu HaKodesh took the oral law and he wrote it down. He took the oral law and wrote it in the Mishnah. And Ravina Ravashi took the continuation of the oral law and wrote it in the Gemara. And Rashi wrote down his explanation. And the Rambam wrote this, the great Sefer, the Arachazoka. So we are based on being a literate people. One of the tragedies in our time is that there's a great section of the Jewish people that is illiterate. They cannot read Hebrew. And even if they can make out the words, they don't understand what's written there. It's very hard to convince an illiterate people of sophisticated ideas. And Judaism is a very sophisticated religion. It's not meant for, people that never think. So Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Sefer Dvorim after he spoke it. So Sefer Dvorim, the Meforshim say, is divided into three sections. The first three parshas, which we have already read this year, are the Parsha of Dvorim itself, and then Voet Hanan, and then the Parsha of Akev. Those three parshas are Moshe Rabbeinu's review of what happened to the Jewish people from the time they left Egypt till they are coming now to the land of Israel. And they are basically what we would call tochacha or musar. Moshe Rabbeinu holds nothing back. He tells them, Mamrim Yusef, your nature is to be rebellious. Your nature is not to obey. Your nature is based on your arrogance, that you know better. So those are the first three parshas. Then we're coming to the next three. The next four, Shoftim, say, here Moshe Rabbeinu tells us mitzvos that were given to him on Sinai, which for various reasons are not recorded in the first four books. I think there's 172 mitzvahs in those three parshas. So that's going to school, so to speak. Moshe Rabbeinu tells them what the mitzvahs are. Now they knew what the mitzvahs were from Sinai, but by repeating them and then later by writing them down, Moshe gives them greater gravitas. And then it becomes the real thing. And included in that are the basic precepts of faith. Shema Yisrael, V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, V'yoim Shamoah Tishmiel. And then the final section of Chumash Dvarim is Nevuah, prophecy. Now I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to you. So that's the Parsha of Kitovo, which tells us in excruciating detail what the Holocaust will look like. The Ramban says, he said it's 800 years ago, that if a person would get up and tell you what's going to be 800 years from now, and every detail it fits what he said was going to happen, you would think that that person had the gift of prophecy. So he said it in the 13th century. He said, if you look at what Moshe said was going to happen to us, you have to be a believer, because everything that he said happened. But in our time, it's abundantly clear. Moshe said exactly what was going to happen. He talked about assimilation, intermarriage, all of the false ideas and ideals that would exist in the world, how the Jewish people are always prone to follow false gods. You know, people say, well, I don't understand. How could my ancestors worship a statue? So the Gemara itself asks that question. The Gemara asked one of the great sinners, the king of Israel, of Judah, how could, if you're such a wise person and an intellectual person, and you know so much, how could you have worshipped statues? And the man answered him. He said, if you would have lived in my time, you would have picked up the hem of your robe in order to run faster to worship that God. Well, we're witness to it. Would you have believed when you grew up that a man can be a woman or a woman can be a man? You can do whatever you want? And that is the correct way to look at the world? You see that it's possible. Not only possible, it becomes the new normal. That's the way it's supposed to be. And Moshe predicts it. That's what's going to happen to you, he said. You lose all sense of right and wrong. But the Lord won't abandon you. And he will force you back, whether you like it or not. And God had many messengers in the world. That force us back, whether we wish to or not. And then Moshe tells them that there's a covenant. God made an agreement with us. And the agreement was that I would preserve you, no matter what you do. After recording all of your sins, you're still my people. Chazal phrased it as only they could. Yisrael, afal pi shechoto, Yisrael. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. You be a communist, an atheist, or whatever, an agnostic, stand on his head, do whatever you want. You're still my people. I'm not going to let go of you. Which is a painful example of ultimate parenthood. A child is a child is a child, even though we all know that children are perhaps the greatest source of grief that people can have. Still my child. Whatever your opinion is upon the current corruption scandals in the United States, etc., one of the lessons that I see in it is that a son is a son is a son. It would be very easy to just abandon the whole thing, walk away from it. You see that you can't help it. The Boni Shalom says in Chumash Dvarim, Moshe said, Boni matem l'Hashem Elokeichem. You're God's children. Parent doesn't walk away from a child. So after I told you everything that's going to happen to you, in Parshas Nitzavim, I'm telling you there's a covenant. And in Vayelech, and part of the covenant is I'll bring you back to the land of Israel, whether you want to or not. In the end, there'll be a blessing. That's the bracha that Moshe's home. That's the last part of Chumash Dvarim. The Parshas of Nevuah. When you're in the middle of the process of the fulfillment of Nevuah, you don't realize that that's what's happening. People never realize the process that they're in. That's true physically, true mentally. I still think I'm 45 years old. And that's when I will get up without the stick. I fall. Because I don't realize the process that I'm in. And certainly true emotionally. And it's true mentally. So there's a positive side to that. Kinar Yisrael ve'ohaveo. Jewish people are always young. They always got a new idea. Got a better way. Going to do it differently. That is also what has preserved us. So Moshe outlines everything for us. The Chumash Dvorim is our story. The Gaon of Vilna is reputed to have said that Jewish history is really Chumash Dvorim. It's the Parshas. So we have to get to Zos HaBrocha, which is, so to speak, the Messianic era, the era of blessing that we all strive for. So it was, I heard this from my teachers, that one of the disciples of the Gaon in about 1780, 350 years ago, asked the Gaon, what parsha are we in now? So the Gaon is reputed to have said, when Parshas Kiseitze, coming is Kisovo, which is the Tochacha. So he said, my Rebbe said, so if you follow that calculation, then we're probably in Vayelech Hazinu. We're coming to the end of the book. So if we look at Chumash Dvorim in that light, we see it in its construct. So then it's in the Western world, unfortunately, it always falls in vacation time. So it doesn't get to do that, for instance, Chumash Bereishis does. Because, we're on vacation. So even though we observe it and we hear it read every Shabbat, but it doesn't make the impression that it should. But that doesn't diminish its importance and its accuracy and its holiness. So when we think of Chumash Dvorim and every parsha in it, we should see it in that type of perspective. And if we hear the Baal Koreh carefully enough, we can hear the voice of Moshe Rabbeinu himself resonate from the words that are being pronounced. And Mokom Yisrael Kamoshe Od. We never had anyone like Moshe. He's our founder, and he's the one that's guided us through all of the narrative of our history. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and Chodesh Tov, and thank you for coming, and stay cool.
Yes. Books in the piano coming later, Rabbi?
I didn't hear you.
Do you have any more of the books?
Yes.
Any more books?
Is Menachem here? Do you know where Menachem keeps the books? Huh?
Can I call Menachem?
Yeah, call him and ask him where the books are.
What's the title?
That's the book of Dvorim.
They had the Shoftim and the Shotrim at the time of the Diego and all the things.
Perspective. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.